My name is Dana Calloway. I'm 31 years old. And the Saturday morning I found 32 unread messages in a group chat I was never supposed to see was the morning I finally understood that some people confuse silence with surrender. The group was called Hargrove Family Summer. My mother-in-law, Patricia, had added her son Marcus, his two sisters, Joelle and Beth, and Patricia's sister Renata. She had not added me. What she had done, at 6:43 in the morning, was accidentally include my number alongside Marcus's when she copied contacts from an old thread. By the time I opened my phone over coffee, 32 messages had already landed. The fourth message from the top was Patricia's. It read, "We'll sort out the sale while everyone is together. Don't invite Dana." I set my mug down. I read the thread from the beginning. I did not type anything back. I screenshot every message, opened a new email to my attorney, and attached all 32 images before I finished my first cup of coffee. That was a Thursday. The closing was scheduled for the following Monday at 2 in the afternoon. It never happened. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever bothered to check, was that my name was the only name on that deed. I want to tell you how we got there because the house did not fall into my life by accident. It arrived the way most things of value arrive, through work that nobody noticed and patience that nobody credited. Marcus and I had been married for 4 years when his grandmother, Elspeth Hargrove, died. She left behind a 2-story lake house in Carver County, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a dock that needed new planking, and a property tax bill that had been quietly accumulating penalties for the prior 2 years because no one in the family had been paying it. Elspeth had lived alone on that property for the last 11 years of her life. She had 4 grandchildren and had loved them all in the specific, conditional way that people love when they are also lonely. She left no formal will. What she left instead was a handwritten letter to Marcus that said, simply, "The house should go to someone who will actually use it." That letter was not a legal instrument. It carried no weight in probate. What carried weight was the conversation that followed at Patricia's kitchen table 3 weeks after the funeral, when the family gathered to discuss the property. I remembered that table clearly. It was a Tuesday evening in October. Patricia had made coffee and set out a store-bought pound cake that no one touched. Marcus sat to my left. Joelle and her husband Terrence sat across from us. Beth had called in by speakerphone from Denver. Renata was there in the corner with a yellow legal pad, which I thought was a strange touch for what was supposed to be a family conversation. The discussion lasted 2 hours. The summary was this: no one wanted the house, but no one wanted to sell it either. Not yet, not while the loss was still fresh. Patricia talked about Elspeth's memory. She described the summers she had brought her children up to that lake, the July mornings when the water was still enough to reflect the tree line. Joelle talked about what the property might be worth in 5 years if they held it. She had pulled up a few comparable listings on her phone and mentioned that a 3-bedroom lake property 2 miles north had sold for $540,000 the prior spring. Beth, on speakerphone, said she could not contribute to the carrying costs and did not want to be liable for the tax arrears. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who had already made her decision and was waiting for everyone else to reach it. Marcus sat quietly and, when asked directly, said he would like to keep it in the family if someone was willing to put in the work. Then Patricia said, with a particular tone she used when she was offering someone a gift they had not asked for, "Marcus, if Dana wants to manage it, she can take on the title. That way it stays in the family and we don't have to deal with the county situation." She said the county situation the way someone says the weather, as though it were a minor inconvenience that had nothing to do with the fact that the unpaid tax balance had reached $14,200 and the county had issued a preliminary lien notice 2 months earlier. The notice was sitting in a folder on the table in front of Renata's yellow legal pad. No one had opened it during the meeting. I looked at Marcus. He looked at me. His expression was the careful neutral of a man who understood the situation he was in and had decided not to have an opinion about it. I said I would think about it overnight. What I actually did was drive home, make tea, and sit at my kitchen table for 2 hours with a legal pad of my own. I listed what taking the title would actually mean: clearing the lien, absorbing the deferred maintenance, carrying the property taxes annually, maintaining the structure. On the other side of the ledger, I listed what I would receive in exchange: informal family goodwill and access to a house I would be entirely responsible for. The ledger was not balanced. But I had worked in grants administration long enough to know that an unbalanced ledger is not always a reason to walk away from a project. Sometimes the value is in what you build, not in what you receive at the closing of the arrangement. I called a real estate attorney the following morning. Her name was Claire Adebisi, and she had been recommended by a colleague at the nonprofit where I worked. I asked her 3 questions: what it would mean to take title as a sole owner, what the exposure was on the tax lien, and whether there were conditions I should negotiate before agreeing. Claire spent 40 minutes walking me through it. She explained that a sole ownership deed meant exactly what it said: one name, full legal authority, no requirement to consult other parties for any property decision including sale, rental, or transfer. She explained that the lien would need to be cleared before the county would process a clean deed transfer, and that I should get a written payoff statement from the county before the closing date to confirm the exact figure. Then she said something I wrote down word for word: if you're going to take on a property with a lien and deferred maintenance, you take it clean, sole ownership, no co-signers, no family verbal agreements running alongside the deed. Verbal understandings don't survive family disagreements. I asked her what she meant by verbal agreements running alongside the deed. She said, I mean that if you agree verbally to let the family use the property, that agreement has no legal weight. If a family member later claims they have a right to use, occupy, or share in proceeds from the property, a verbal promise cannot create that right. The deed controls. Make sure the deed reflects what you actually want. I went back to Patricia with one condition: I would clear the lien, take the title in my name only, and carry the property going forward. In exchange, the family could use it for gatherings. I would not restrict access, but the legal ownership would be mine and mine alone. No co-owners. No side agreements in writing. A clean deed. Patricia agreed, without hesitation. She shook my hand at her kitchen table and said, You've always been the practical one, Dana. It was the most backhanded compliment I had ever received. I wrote it down in my notebook that night because I had a feeling I would want to remember the exact wording someday. The closing on the title transfer happened on a Wednesday in November. The county lien was cleared by wire transfer, $14,200 plus $340 in administrative fees, and I signed the deed in Claire Adebisi's office while Marcus waited in the lobby reading a magazine. The whole process took 40 minutes. The notary who witnessed my signature was a quiet man named Harold, who handed me my copy of the recorded deed in a manila envelope and said, Congratulations on the property. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. Over the next 3 years, I put $67,000 into that property. Not all at once. In installments, the way you do when you're working a nonprofit salary and watching every dollar. The first spring I replaced the dock planking, $8,400 for materials and labor, using a marine contractor named Dwight Sable, who had worked on lake properties in Carver County for 20 years. Dwight walked me through every section of the dock, pointed out where the original hardware had oxidized past safe use, and gave me a written estimate before touching anything. That was the first time I understood that the dock had not been properly maintained for at least 5 years before Elspeth's death. The underlying frame was sound, but barely. That summer, a routine septic inspection flagged a failing distribution box, a component I had not known to check for and that the prior inspection, conducted for years before Elspeth's death, had marked as functional. The replacement and full system flush cost $11,200. The contractor, a licensed septic engineer named Rosa Veltri, filed the updated inspection certificate with the county health department, which I learned was a legal requirement for properties on private septic in Carver County. Rosa also noted that the system had likely been marginal for at least 2 of the prior 3 years and that regular use of the property, family gatherings, overnight guests, had accelerated its degradation. I filed Rosa's certificate with my property folder and added septic inspection to my annual maintenance checklist. The following May, I painted the exterior. The quote from a local painting crew came in at $9,200. I negotiated it down to $6,800 by agreeing to handle the prep work, scraping, sanding, priming the front porch trim, myself. I drove up 2 weekends in a row and worked through both Saturdays while Marcus's family was elsewhere. Nobody offered to help. Nobody knew I was there. The kitchen got new counters, $4,100, butcher block I sanded and sealed myself over a long weekend in March. The master bath got a new vanity and fixture set, $2,200, installed by a plumber I had used for a previous repair. The water heater was replaced after it failed on a January weekend when Patricia's sister Renata and her husband were using the house, and called Marcus at midnight to report there was no hot water. I drove up the following Saturday, confirmed the unit had failed, arranged a same-week replacement with a local HVAC company, and had the new unit running by Tuesday. The invoice, $1,640, went to my account. No one offered to contribute. Renata sent me a text that said, "Thank you, Dana. You're a lifesaver," folded hands, and I replied, "Happy to help." That was the full exchange. I kept a spreadsheet. Every expense, every vendor, every date, every invoice number. Not because I expected to be reimbursed. I kept it because I had learned, working in grants administration for 7 years, that documentation is the only version of a story that survives a disagreement. Grant auditors do not accept memory. County assessors do not accept intention. A spreadsheet is a fact. The family used the house freely, and I kept the door open the way I had promised. Patricia hosted a birthday dinner for Marcus's uncle one August. 40 people on the lawn, a catered barbecue, fairy lights strung from the porch posts. I had driven up the day before to make sure the propane tanks were full, the dock gate was latched properly for the children, and the kitchen was stocked with basics. I stayed through cleanup the following morning, collected the scattered outdoor cushions before the morning rain, and drove home with a trash bag of other people's disposable plates in the back of my car. Joelle hosted her book club there one October weekend. 8 women, 2 nights, a case of wine. I had aired out the guest rooms the week before and left fresh towels. I drove up Sunday evening after they left to reset the house for winter, found a broken lampshade in the second bedroom, and replaced it the following week from a home goods store. The receipt went into the spreadsheet. No one said thank you in a way that registered. That is not a complaint. It is just an accurate description of what that period looked like. Marcus and I separated in February of the year the reunion was planned. It was not a dramatic separation. It was the kind that happens when 2 people have been roommates in a marriage for long enough that the silence between them stops feeling like comfort and starts feeling like a judgment. We had no children. We had a shared lease on an apartment, 2 joint bank accounts, and a lake house that was solely in my name. The divorce proceedings were civil. We used a mediator, a retired family court judge named Warren Chu, who ran a 2-person practice out of an office above a dry cleaner on Millard Street. Warren was methodical and unhurried. In our second session, he went through the asset list line by line. When he reached the lake house, he noted the deed structure, confirmed with both attorneys that Marcus had not contributed financially to the property's acquisition or maintenance, and classified it as separate non-marital property. Marcus's attorney noted it for the record. Marcus himself said, flatly, that he understood. We signed the settlement agreement in March. I did not hear from the Hargrove family for the rest of that spring. Patricia sent me a text message on my birthday in April, a single line, "Hope you're doing well, Dana." I replied, "Thank you, Patricia." That was the full extent of our contact until the morning of the 32 messages. I want to be precise about what I found in that thread because the sequence matters. The first 10 messages were logistics. Patricia proposing the 4th weekend in July for the reunion. Joelle confirming she and Terrence could make it. Beth saying she would fly in from Denver, and could she bring her new boyfriend. Renata suggesting they hire a catering company she had used for a corporate event, someone named Phyllis Okafor, who ran a small operation out of the next county over and came recommended for outdoor events. Message 11 was Patricia again. "The house will look perfect for photos this summer." Dana kept it up, I'll give her that. Message 12 was Joelle. "Does she know we're planning this?" Message 13 was Patricia. "No. And let's keep it that way until we've talked to Craig." Craig was Craig Fairweather. He appeared in message 14, a screenshot Joelle had taken of a text exchange with him. Craig Fairweather was a licensed real estate agent in Carver County. The screenshot showed Joelle telling Craig they were ready to move forward, and Craig responding that he could have a listing agreement ready by the end of the month and that, given current comps, we're looking at $580,000 to $620,000, strong seller's market right now. Message 15 was Patricia. Perfect. We'll sort out the sale while everyone is together. Don't invite Dana. The remaining 17 messages were further logistics. Who was sleeping where? Whether the dock needed new life preservers checked before children arrived, whether Phyllis Okafor needed a deposit up front or at the event. Renata had already confirmed the deposit amount with Phyllis, $800, non-refundable. Joelle had drafted a packing list. Beth had asked whether the second-floor bathroom had been updated. Patricia had replied, Dana redid the vanity. It's fine. I read the thread twice. I set my phone on the table. Then I picked it up again, opened my email, and forwarded all 32 screenshots to Claire Adebisi with a single line. Please call me when you're available today. Claire called at 9:17. I walked her through the thread in order. She was quiet while I read the relevant messages aloud. When I finished, she said, Dana, they cannot list, sell, or transfer that property without your signature. They cannot sign a listing agreement on your behalf. They cannot accept an offer. They cannot schedule the closing. The deed is yours alone, and any attempt to proceed without your written authorization would expose Craig Fairweather's license to a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission. I said I understood. She said, Do you want me to contact Craig Fairweather's office directly? I said yes. Then I went back to the group text, the one that still showed my number, the one Patricia had not yet noticed, and typed the only message I sent into that thread. The caterer will need to cancel. So will the realtor. I set my phone face down on the table and went to work. The family's response arrived in waves, and I watched it from a careful distance. Patricia called Marcus first. He told me this later, with the flat, tired tone of a man who had been hoping to stay out of it. She told him there had been a misunderstanding, that the group text was informal, that nothing had been finalized. Marcus told her to call me directly. She did not call me directly for another 11 hours. Joelle called me at 11:40 in the morning. I let it ring. She left a voicemail that began with, Dana, I know how this looks, and ended with, we just assumed, since the divorce, that the house situation would naturally. And then she stopped herself, perhaps recognizing that the end of that sentence was not going to help her position. The voicemail was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. I played it once, noted the timestamp, and did not return it. Beth sent a text from Denver at noon. We didn't mean to exclude you. Can we talk? Her message had the particular syntax of someone who knew she was on the wrong side of something and was hoping a conversation would move her to a different position without requiring her to say specifically what she was sorry for. I read these as they arrived. I did not respond to any of them. Claire Adebisi's paralegal, a precise and unhurried woman named Sandra, reached Craig Fairweather's office at 10:45 that morning. Sandra informed Craig's assistant that the property at the Carver County address had a sole owner of record, myself, who had not authorized any listing agreement, had not been contacted by Craig's office, and would not be providing authorization. Sandra also noted that proceeding with a listing under those circumstances would constitute a material misrepresentation to prospective buyers and could give rise to a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission. She suggested Craig's office take appropriate steps before any further communication with the Hargrove family. Craig Fairweather called Joelle at 11:15. I know this because Joelle left a voicemail for Marcus shortly after, which Marcus relayed to me 2 days later with the careful neutrality of a man reporting a weather event. The agent called and said he couldn't move forward, that there was a sole title issue, and that he was withdrawing from any listing arrangement immediately. By noon on Thursday, the listing that had never officially gone live was also officially dead. Patricia called me at 8:17 that evening. I answered on the second ring. She opened with, Dana, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding and I'd like to explain. I said, Go ahead. She said that the family had assumed, given the divorce, that the house would naturally revert to the Hargrove side of things. She used the phrase the Hargrove side of things twice. She said Elspeth had always intended the house to stay in the family. She said she had not meant to exclude me from the conversation, only to handle the logistical details before bringing me in at the right moment. She said Craig Fairweather was simply someone Joelle knew socially, and the conversation with him had been exploratory and informal, nothing binding. She said the reunion itself had been planned in love, not in strategy. I listened to all of it without interrupting. I had a pen in my hand, and I wrote down the phrase at the right moment because I wanted to remember that exact framing. When she finished, I said, "Patricia, the deed has been in my name since November, 4 years ago. I cleared a $14,540 lien on the day of closing. I have put $67,000 into that property since then. Dock, septic, exterior, kitchen, bathrooms, water heater. Every invoice is in a folder. None of that work was done on behalf of the family as a co-owner arrangement. It was done by the sole owner of the property, which is me. There was never a parallel legal interest. I think you knew that, which is why the plan was to sort it out while everyone was together and not invite me." There was a pause. A chair scraped somewhere in the background of her kitchen. She said, "I didn't think you'd want to be bothered with the details." I said, "I'm the details, Patricia." Another pause. I heard her exhale, a long, careful breath. She said, "We'd like to still use the house for the reunion, if that's possible. The family has been through a hard year." I said, "No." She said, "Dana?" I said, "The access arrangement was part of an informal understanding made in good faith on my part. That understanding changed when I read message 15. I won't be restoring informal access on the basis of this conversation." She said, "That seems very extreme for what was a planning mistake." I said, "You're welcome to have your attorney contact Claire Adebisi if you'd like to discuss the property formally. Her contact information is on file." Patricia said nothing for a long moment. I heard something shift in the background, a cabinet, perhaps, or a drawer. Then she said, "I always thought you were level-headed, Dana." I said, "I know you did." We ended the call. The call had lasted 9 minutes. I set the phone down on the counter and stood in my kitchen for a moment with my hand resting on the edge of the sink. Then I made dinner. The consequence cascade did not require my participation. That is the thing about a situation where someone has built a plan on a foundation they never verified. When the foundation gives way, the structure comes down on its own schedule. Craig Fairweather had moved quickly enough in the prior weeks that a preliminary buyer had been informally identified, a couple from the metropolitan area who had been searching for a lake property in Carver County and had expressed strong interest based on Craig's description of the listing. That couple had spoken to a mortgage lender, had begun mentally allocating their summer around a possible closing timeline, and had driven past the property on a Saturday afternoon to look at it from the road. When Craig called to inform them the listing would not proceed due to a title issue, they moved on to another property within 48 hours. A comparable lake property 2 roads over closed 3 weeks later. That was not my doing. That was simply a market moving the way markets do, with or without the Hargrove family's plans. Joelle had told several people in her social circle about the planned sale, framing it as a family decision to consolidate after the divorce and move forward together. She had mentioned it at a dinner party sometime in June, according to what Marcus eventually told me. When the sale collapsed and the reunion was canceled, those same people asked questions. Joelle's explanation that there had been a title complication was accurate, but it invited follow-up questions she was not equipped to answer, without describing the specifics of how the deed had been structured and why. The version of the story that circulated was vague, which meant it was also incomplete, which meant it invited the kind of speculation that vague stories always invite. Renata's $800 deposit to Phyllis Okafor was non-refundable, as specified in the event contract. Renata had signed 11 days before anyone had confirmed the property situation with me or with anyone who had access to the county record. Renata called Phyllis on Friday to cancel. Phyllis, professionally and correctly, kept the deposit and offered to apply it as a credit toward a future booking. Renata did not book a future event. Beth flew in from Denver anyway. The trip was already ticketed, and she decided to visit Patricia regardless of the reunion status. I know this because Beth sent me a text the Sunday after everything resolved that said simply, "I'm sorry, Dana. I should have asked more questions." I read it twice. I did not respond that day. A week later I replied, "Thank you for saying that." That was the full exchange. The house sat quiet that July 4th weekend. I drove up on Friday evening, unlocked the front door, walked through each room. The dock latch was fine. The kitchen was clean. The second-floor bathroom vanity I had installed 2 years earlier still looked new. I sat on the porch for an hour, watching the light go flat on the water. I did not take photographs. I drove back home Saturday morning in the early quiet before traffic built. 6 months after the reunion that never happened, I filed to formally update the property's emergency contact and management records with Carver County, an administrative detail I had let sit on my to-do list longer than I should have, and one that now seemed worth completing promptly. Claire Adebisi helped me draft a simple property management agreement for my own records. That same autumn, I contacted a property management firm, a woman named Teresa Vunt, who handled vacation rentals across the Lake District. Teresa came out, walked the house from the dock to the roof line, noted the quality of the updated systems and the condition of the exterior work, and told me the property could yield between $3,200 and $3,800 per week in peak summer weeks, with meaningful shoulder season demand as well. She also noted that the dock was in better condition than most comparable properties she managed. Whoever maintained this, she said, knew what they were doing. I told her I had managed it myself. The first summer under Teresa's management, the house was rented for 11 of 14 available peak weeks. Total seasonal income came to $41,600. I used a portion to retire the outstanding balance on the septic work and began a dedicated reserve account for the roof, which Claire and I had agreed warranted replacement within 2 years based on its age and the county's exposure to winter ice loading. The house was in use. People brought their children and sat on the porch in the evenings and came back the following summer and left reviews describing the dock as perfectly maintained and the kitchen as surprisingly well-equipped. One family from out of state booked the same week 2 years running and left a note on the kitchen table on their last morning. "Thank you for taking such good care of this place." I kept that note in the manila envelope with the original deed. I do not have a dramatic ending to offer you. Marcus and I remained on civil terms for a year or so after the settlement, and then, over time, exchanged no messages at all. Patricia and I did not speak again after that 9-minute phone call. Joelle sent me a Christmas card the following December, signed with her first name only, no message inside. I set it on my counter for a few days and then recycled it without particular feeling. I still have the spreadsheet. Every vendor, every date, every invoice number, every amount. $67,000 across 3 years of work, plus the lien, plus 4 years of property taxes and insurance. Not a complaint, a record. The kind of record that turns out to matter when the people who gathered on your porch and ate at your outdoor tables and used your dock decide to plan around you. Here is what I have understood in the time since. Some arrangements only look like generosity. What they actually are is a transfer of labor and liability, packaged in the language of family and softened with an occasional thank you. Recognizing the difference is not cynicism. It is accuracy. I own the deed. I paid the taxes. I replaced the water heater in January. I sat on that porch on a Friday evening in July while a closing scheduled for the following Monday dissolved, quietly, in a county records office where my name had been on file for 4 years. That was always the whole story. A door that opens only when it is convenient for someone else was never really held open for you. Knowing which doors you own and maintaining them accordingly is the only version of security that holds. That Monday closing never happened. A 3-bedroom lake house in Carver County is still listed under one name in a record that anyone can look up in under 3 minutes. Here is what I keep returning to. There were 32 messages in that thread before anyone paused to check the deed. If you found those messages and you had the document, at what point would you have made the call? When would you have said enough? If this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new story posts every week. Share it with someone who would understand, and leave a comment below. I read every one.